Welcome back to Walking Tall, Talking Bold, the podcast where we have the honest conversations many are afraid to start. I'm your host, Leah, and today's episode is one that I think is going to hit close to home for a lot of you. We're talking about jealousy, but not the way you've heard it talked about before. Not as something toxic to eliminate or something romantic to glorify, but as something deeply human. Something that, when we slow down and actually listen to it, it is often telling us something important about our emotional needs, our boundaries, and how we love each other. Today's story comes from over 30 years of marriage, real moments, hard conversations, and the kind of wisdom that only comes from actually living it. Settle in and let's unpack this one together. After more than 30 years of marriage, I can honestly say that jealousy has existed in my relationship. Not constantly, not destructively, but honestly, it has been there. And over those years, I've learned something important. Jealousy is not always about wanting to control somebody. Sometimes it is about wanting to feel emotionally protected, emotionally considered, and emotionally respected by the person you love. I think a lot of people oversimplify jealousy. We either label it toxic or we romanticize it as proof of love. But I think the truth lives somewhere in the middle. Because after decades of marriage, life experience, hard conversations, misunderstandings, growth, and maturity, I've come to believe that what many people call jealousy is sometimes really about emotional boundaries. And emotional boundaries in relationships are real, even when they are invisible. When my husband and I first got together, I honestly don't remember feeling deeply jealous. Maybe it was because we were younger, maybe because our lives had not fully merged yet. We loved each other, but there were still many things that were his and mine. We were building a relationship, but we still had separate identities, separate routines, and honestly, separate emotional worlds. We dated for a long time before marriage, so by the time we actually got married, the honeymoon phase was pretty much over. I was still young and still trying to figure out who I was as a woman, not just as somebody's wife. Marriage itself was something I was still learning. But over time, relationships deepen. Your lives become interconnected emotionally, financially, socially, spiritually. And when someone becomes deeply connected to your emotional world, certain things begin to affect you differently. That's when I started realizing jealousy wasn't always about fear of cheating. Sometimes it was about feeling unseen. Sometimes it was about feeling emotionally unsupported in certain moments. I remember one particular evening that stayed with me over the years. We were out with another couple, just having conversation, laughing, talking about marriage and relationships. Somehow the conversation turned into women wearing unattractive clothes to bed after marriage. Now listen, I have always been cold. Winter, summer, spring, fall. My husband still jokes about it to this day. I wear pajamas, night clothes, socks sometimes. Sleeping naked or in lingerie every night just was never me. But this other woman at the table proudly talked about how she slept nude, and the conversation turned playful and teasing. My husband and the couple laughed and joked about women letting themselves go after marriage, and suddenly I became the joke. What hurt me wasn't even the topic itself. It was the feeling of becoming invisible at the table, while another woman became the center of my husband's attention. Every time I tried to explain myself or join the conversation, I felt dismissed, like my perspective did not matter, like there was something wrong with me for simply being myself. And I remember later telling my husband how uncomfortable it made me feel. I expected him to understand immediately, but instead it became an argument because in his mind it was harmless conversation. But for me, something deeper had happened. It wasn't jealousy because another woman existed. It was jealousy because emotionally I felt left standing alone while my husband connected with someone else in a way that made me feel exposed and unsupported. That was one of the first times I realized emotional boundaries are often invisible. But invisible does not mean unimportant. And honestly, I think this is where many couples struggle. One person sees harmless conversation. The other person feels emotionally abandoned in the moment. One person says, "You're overreacting." The other person is quietly thinking, "Why didn't you protect me?" I think people confuse jealousy with control all the time. Feeling jealous is human. Trying to control another person because of that jealousy is where things can become unhealthy. I never wanted to tell my husband who he could or could not talk to. That was never my goal. What I wanted was reassurance, consideration, awareness. I wanted to feel like our relationship was being respected, even in small social interactions. And over the years, we had to revisit those conversations more than once. Not because our marriage was failing, but because relationships evolved and emotional needs evolved too. Sometimes I let things go. Sometimes I spoke up. And honestly, that's part of long-term relationships too. Learning which moments require conversation and which moments require grace. But I also learned something important about myself over time. I came into myself. As I got older, I became more secure in who I was. I stopped needing constant validation about my appearance or my worth. I learned that confidence is not about competing with other women. It is about knowing yourself deeply enough that you no longer disappear when somebody overlooks you. But confidence does not make you emotionless. Even secure people deserve emotional consideration. And while I grew in confidence, I also started recognizing something else in my marriage. My husband never directly told me what to wear, but over time he made it clear what he liked and didn't like. Sometimes it was subtle, pointing out another woman's style, complimenting another woman enthusiastically after giving me a dry "it's fine" when I asked how I looked. And listen, moments like that could still sting. Not because I hated myself, not because I lacked confidence, but because words and attention carry emotional weight in relationships. The difference was, I spoke up, not always screaming, not attacking, but honestly saying, "That hurt me. That felt dismissive. That behavior is not okay with me." Now, I'm not going to pretend we had one magical conversation and never dealt with these issues again. That's not real marriage. Real marriage is revisiting conversations as people grow and change. But something else happened over the years too. I began paying attention to how I interacted with married men because I knew firsthand how certain behavior could affect a relationship. I remember being out with couples one night and one husband complimented me on how I looked. I said thank you politely, but then I noticed the shift. The conversation stopped feeling friendly and started feeling personal. He kept trying to pull my attention toward him while his wife sat right there, and I could feel her discomfort. Now, I could have entertained it. Some people do. Some people enjoy that attention. But I immediately shifted my attention back toward his wife. I kept her included in the conversation. Every time he tried redirecting things back to just me and him, I brought the energy back to the group because I never wanted another woman to feel invisible the way I once felt. And honestly, that has become one of my strongest beliefs over the years. Respecting relationships matters, not just your own relationship, other people's relationships too. I used to work for a man with a mostly female staff, and sometimes we had to call his home about work matters. Whenever his wife answered the phone, I always greeted her warmly. I spoke respectfully. I acknowledged her presence before asking to speak to him. and after about a year, she told me something I never forgot. She said she appreciated the way I handled those calls because many other women would call the house and immediately say, "Put Paul on the phone." No greeting, no acknowledgement, no consideration that this was somebody's home and marriage. Now, some people would say, "That's insecurity. That's not my responsibility. If he's going to cheat, he's going to cheat." And of course, if somebody wants to cheat, they will. But to me, that's not even the point. The point is emotional respect. I think modern culture sometimes dismisses emotional boundaries as weakness, insecurity, or possessiveness. But I think emotional intelligence is understanding that our behavior affects people, even when our intentions are innocent. And I have seen people intentionally create chaos in relationships. Not necessarily because they wanted the husband. Sometimes it felt more like wanting power, wanting validation, wanting to feel emotionally important, almost like competing with the spouse without openly admitting it. And honestly, I think it takes more maturity to respect a relationship than to test one. After more than 30 years of marriage, I do not believe the goal is to never feel jealous. I think the goal is learning how to love each other responsibly through those emotions, to reassure without controlling, to communicate without humiliating, to respect the relationship even in small moments, to recognize invisible emotional boundaries before they become emotional wounds, and maybe most importantly, to never make the person you love feel invisible. Because sometimes what looks like jealousy on the surface is really someone asking, "Do I still matter to you in this moment?" And I think that is a very human question. Thank you for joining today's episode of Walking Tall, Talking Bold. And I just want to take a moment before you go. If you have ever felt invisible in a moment that mattered, I want you to know that your feelings are valid. Your emotional needs are not weakness, and they are not insecurities. They are not too much. They are simply you, asking to be loved with intention and care. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be considered. And you are more than capable of loving boldly and communicating honestly, even when it's hard. Keep growing. Keep showing up. I'm Leah, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Walking Tall, Talking Bold. Please like and subscribe and join the conversations that matter.